Buenas tardes a todos, les damos la bienvenida a esta edición del Café Científico del TEC de Monterrey. Estamos muy emocionados de poder compartir este tema tan interesante. Transdisciplinary Approach to Value Chains and Opportunities. Muchas gracias a los doctores que nos acompañan el día de hoy por compartirnos su tiempo y su experiencia. Esta edición se va a llevar a cabo en inglés y pueden ir poniendo en el chat todas sus preguntas durante la sesión y al final las vamos a leer. El doctor Bryan Moser es director académico de diseño y gestión de sistemas del MIT y profesor titular de ingeniería y del Sloan School of Management. También es profesor asociado especialmente designado, Escuela de Graduados de Ciencias de la Frontera en la Universidad de Tokio. Antes de regresar al MIT en el 2014, trabajó durante 25 años en la industria, como ingeniero de investigación en el Laboratorio de Ciencias Básicas de Nissan Motor Company, como científico investigador senior en United Technologies Corporation y como fundador y CEO del Global Project Design, el fabricante de Teamport para la gestión de proyectos basada en modelos. Moser se centra en la ingeniería del trabajo en equipo para problemas de sistemas complejos y el uso de métodos basados en modelos para mejorar el rendimiento de diversos equipos. Moser recibió una licenciatura en Ciencias de la Computación e Ingeniería en 1987 y una maestría en Tecnología y Política del Instituto de Tecnología en Massachusetts en 1989. Su doctorado en el 2012 es de la Universidad de Tokio, Escuela de Graduados de Ciencias de la Frontera. El doctor Federico Trigos lidera el grupo de investigación Análisis Transdisciplinario de la Cadena de Valor y Oportunidades Globales en la Escuela de Negocios del TEC de Monterrey. Tiene un doctorado y una maestría en Ciencias de la Escuela de la Ingeniería Industrial y de Sistemas del Instituto de Tecnología de Georgia. Además, tiene una maestría en Finanzas y una maestría en Investigación de Operaciones del TEC de Monterrey. Fue director fundador del programa de doctorado en Ingeniería Industrial del TEC de Monterrey en el 2001. El interés de investigación del doctor Trigos se centra en el desarrollo de modelos prescriptivos, cuantitativos, transdisciplinarios y sus soluciones para promover un rendimiento sistémico óptimo. Es miembro de la Academia Mexicana de Ciencias y miembro del Sistema Nacional de Investigadores de México. MIT reconoce al doctor Trigos como miembro de la Facultad Internacional y es miembro activo de grupos de investigación globales que participan en 4 continentes. Como les comentaba en un inicio, la sesión se va a llevar a cabo en inglés y pueden ir haciendo todas sus preguntas por medio del chat para hacerlas al final en nuestra sesión del Q&A. Doctores, muchas gracias de nuevo y les cedo la palabra.
Thank you very much, Greta, for those very nice presentations. I like to thank my good colleague, Dr. Bryan Moser, for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Last year, he worked as the president of the International Society of the Transdisciplinary Engineering Conference that was held during the summer at MIT, and he did a wonderful job on that, and he has a long career in that discipline. So I'm very grateful that he's with us today to talk a little bit about that. And also, he's a great advocate for this approach to problem solving. Dr. Moser, would you please tell us about the transdisciplinary approach and how it differentiates from previous approaches like interdisciplinary, intradisciplinary, and multidisciplinary, so the audience could gear up on this thing?
Okay, Federico, it's so good to see you. And first, my thanks to everyone. It's a privilege to be associated with Tec de Monterrey. There's a long tradition and history of MIT and Tec de Monterrey, and I'm happy to continue that tradition. This first question is sometimes confounding. You know, what's the difference engineering has been complicated for a long time. And if we go back even 100 years to the origins of modern disciplines in engineering, most of the engineers were learning a single disciplinary profession. Each discipline was still developing their first laws and principles, their fundamental methods. And so in civil engineering and electrical engineering, we're still emerging. And I think we discovered as the systems we were building became more and more complicated, we needed more and more professions to be involved. And so clearly in the latter half of the last century, as engineers and as teachers of engineers, we began focusing on multidisciplinary engineering or cross-functional engineering. And this is obvious. We know now that even though as a materials engineer or a structural engineer, I may follow my first laws and principles to make decisions, in the end, I'll have to make trades, or someone has to make trades to take into account all of the other aspects of engineering. Well, now we're, I think, even further proceeding where the grand challenges of our time are now so complex and connected, and they are long-lived. The life cycle of the systems we create now span far beyond the period of time when we first released them. And so now we must be beyond multidisciplinary. That an engineer, to be professional, and if we are concerned about also educating engineers, must be capable of interacting with and making trades with non-engineers, with experts, economists, regulators, legal scholars, sociologists, and even more importantly, we must, as engineers, be able to have dialogue with non-experts, and especially the stakeholders and the communities in which we are doing our work. So it's been over a century-long journey, but it does say something about what it means to be a professional engineer today.
And also, as Tec de Monterrey, we have walked that road for so long. When I did my undergraduate here at Tech as an industrial system engineer, we talk about the initial basis of what a system is and what are the parts and how they're interlinked, and how when you work on something, you have to think about the forest while working on some trees. And really look at what is the final performance of the thing and not the partial performance of the things. And we're talking the 70s when, in 72, if my memory is not wrong, we started the undergraduates that has to do with systems engineering. I know that it was several decades before that it started in the States. So in my mind, I see this transdisciplinary approach like an evolution of those origins of systems engineering, in which we were taught that you have to understand what the people in management does, what the people in engineering does, what is going on the floor, what is going with the customer. And now we call them stakeholders. So it's not only that you are talking engineering or quantitative disciplines and management and other non-quantitative disciplines, but now how do they interact within the organization and with all these stakeholders involved? And also, yes, go ahead.
It's ironic. I mean, centuries ago, for a craft professional, of course, the capability of the professional was to be in context, to know the community, to adjust. And in the last century, as industry grew and exploded, and especially in North America compared to around the world, we became very reductionist. We really began to focus on optimization and growth of individual things. I think I think the requirement to have dialogue with context, and it's more than one dialogue actually, but it's certainly nothing new. But I think we're becoming, thankfully, I think we're becoming quite aware of the responsibilities and the opportunities of seeing the world through the lens of systems, and then learning as engineers to take this into account as we design and as we validate and as we evolve the systems in the field. So yeah, perhaps not new, but I think finally we're coming around. But let me say one last thing, because in the 1970s, system dynamics as well, with Professor Forrester and then Donella Meadows' work in systems, there's been a bit of a back and forth between qualitative and quantitative approaches to systems engineering or systems thinking. And I hope what we're seeing now is kind of moving beyond this kind of simplistic soft versus hard debate, and really understanding that at the heart of our engineering practice is a requirement to be able to think both holistically and to think locally.
And in that regard, when we talk about holistically, we have to come up with the word's sustainability. For example, when I did my undergraduate in the 80s, I remember that many of my professors were guided by cost or were guided by profit. And they say, well, you as a manager or as an engineer, you must focus on how to make the thing with the least cost as possible. And then later, decades later, we said, well, the cost is not that so much important. The important is the return. So it doesn't matter if you spend a little more money as long as the return it's paid. But now, when we see these things globally, having the return is not enough. You have to be sustainable, which means you have to be okay with the society. You have to be okay with the environment. So, in my opinion, it's not that the professors were wrong. So they just got the partial way. So the economics is important, but we would like the economics to be sustainable through time, and that tells us this systemic thing. So if we have sustainability.
Absolutely. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm excited by this conversation. The word sustainable is often used two ways. One is related specifically to nature, which I think many more people are aware of perhaps more than in recent past, of the significance of the human enterprise and its effects on nature. And of course, sustainable also means long-lived, right? Being the ability to continue. And so it's not that, when we're reductionist and we reduce it to just one kind of value. I suppose it's meritorious, but really tough engineering problems are fun because it's more than one dimension of value. It's my engineering skills are challenged the most when I'm thinking about value in many ways. And I'm leveraging and working with many disciplines to craft a solution that is going to be long-lived, produce profit and value for many people of different kinds, and often lead to surprising and synergistic effects in the communities in which our products live. So I think I've said to you recently when we spoke, I wish I was 30 years younger, because it's an exciting time to be an engineer. There's so many wonderful problems to work on. And it feels to me that in our global community, we're developing partnerships in deploying all kinds of new capabilities in energy, in materials, in systems understanding, that if I was at 25 again, I would be jumping into all these new projects.
I cannot agree more on that, but I always wonder if for former professors 20 years ago or so, or our parents, also thought the same thing, that it was an exciting time, and they had some opportunities and challenges. But as we talked before in several times, I find the world full of opportunities. And one of the main skills that a student and a professional, a graduate, I believe they must develop is how to see these opportunities and how to select which ones he, she, or they are going to work on or to participate. Because at the end of the day, we only have 24 hours a day, plus the participation of the team. And that is the influence that we could offer to the world. So just defining in which things we're going to work on to make our a bigger footprint, that's quite a challenge. These are amazing times to do that.
They really are. And we often talk about life cycle, meaning what happens after we do our engineering. But I think equally, we spend a lot of time now on what happens before our engineering, in what my colleague Don Lazard refers to as shaping the project. There's conversations and concept development, ambiguity reduction, all these things that help us to frame the problem together so that we can find the essential opportunity, value, and risk before we get into the details of optimization and engineering. And engineering leaders, great engineers, have a lot of respect for the problem framing. And so we're now spending much more time in our teaching as well on having students as teams spending time stepping back, having a holistic or systems view, and to rehearse what it means to uncover the essential problems and to define what the problem statement is even to begin with. And I don't remember being taught that in the 1980s. So.
Actually,
maybe I just don't remember, but that's another thing.
I think you hit the nail on the head. For example, we can go back all the way to Alexander the Great, in which he faced frequently a problem like that, something that seems impossible for everybody. So he get together with his team and say, well, the problem is impossible this way, but let's to reframe it. So how could we take advantage of all the knowledge, experience, and skills that we have and reframe this problem in order to achieve it? In that regard, yes, go ahead.
Well, we have to think about the readiness of the engineering teams, but also the engineering individual. And again, maybe a surprising topic that we now think is central to the engineering education. For transdisciplinarity, we said it was about conversation with others, dialogue with others, and being able to have that dialogue with the economist and the ethnographer and others. At the same time, in order for oneself to be high performing and to be able to engage, especially for reframing of problems, it's important to have dialogue with oneself, and to be comfortable in ambiguity, and to be prepared to have debate and negotiation and partnership building with others who have a different background and a different value set and a different culture. And so now we're thinking about all of these necessary capabilities to be a great engineer that stretch from the individual to seeing the world as a system, and from before the engineering until well after the engineering is done.
And actually, the skill to listen and the skill to learn how to teach yourself, and sometimes how to remove your learnings to make room for new knowledge or new skills, it's paramount in this time.
I teach in Japan and I teach in the United States, and certainly I think U.S. educated students could use more of that. They're pretty good at talking. I'm not sure how good they are at listening.
Yes. I would like to offer an example of a transdisciplinary problem, so probably the audience will get a little more grasp of that, if that's okay. So once upon a time, in a faraway first world country, there was a little town in which it was so far away from the main cities that even though the people have a great level of life, economically wise, they didn't have power lines, but they have enough money to buy petrol or gasoline. They have the power generators in their house. They have good houses. The economy of the town was good, given that they have the electricity. And at some point, somebody, probably the mayor or one of the leaders, said, well, it doesn't make sense that a great community like us doesn't have power lines. And we have to buy petrol in order to do this, and that's not sustainable because of the smoke and things like that. So let's modernize ourselves. So let's go to the main government and see if they could help us to have some electricity in the way we should be in the 21st century. So they go to the main government, and what happened? They sent a number of engineers and say, guys, this town pays a lot of taxes and they deserve to have good electricity. So go there, use your engineering skills and solve the problem. So a number of engineers came to this town and say, well, what is the cost of doing the power lines? No, that's beyond the budget that we were given. So they tried wind, water, thermal, etc., and then decide that the wind through the mountains was enough to build these windmills to generate the electricity. So let's say a number of months later, they built a number of these towers, and they look really modern. And one day, they have a great celebration at City Hall and say, well, we enter the 21st century. Now we have sustainable power generations because of the wind. Thanks to the great engineers of our country, we have done this at the budget that we have. And, there was a big button at the middle of the City Hall, and somebody pressed the button. Probably the button was fake. And some engineer pulled the lever, and it was night. So everybody at some point turned off their generators. When this guy pushed the button, the whole town light up and say, okay, we are sustainable. That's great. So, Mr. Mayor, according to our book, we are going to come back in 6 months for maintenance. So make sure that you follow these weekly little things for this to work. And they left. 6 months later, guess what happened? The engineers came back, and they didn't see the high towers of the windmills from afar. They look the mountains as they were before. So they came to the field where the towers were, and the towers were disassembled. They were pieces all over the lands, and no more power wind. So they went to the city hall and say, what happened with this? Did they malfunction? Did you have an earthquake? A terrorist act? Or what happened? Say, well, we had some problems after you left. We have some livestock, and we also grow some crops. So the power mills, they have a sound when they turn. And our livestock got nervous, they got thinner, they lost weight. They also vibrate. And our crops in the next harvest, they were not as good. So the economy of the town was in danger. And we decided to disassemble the things. So what happened from a great engineering solution that at the end was disassembled? I don't know if we could have some questions from the audience, or we could interact with them, or they could post some questions or some comments on this, Greta?
Or please disagree with us. That's fine.
Or they could disagree.
It means, well, it's really, from your story, I mean, we talk about sustainability. I think another key trend in engineering is also flexibility and evolvability. And we have an opportunity, I hope, to rethink infrastructure and social infrastructure, to not try to replicate the pattern of infrastructure from 50 years ago was wonderful compared to 50 years before. I'm from Kentucky, and so we had our first electricity in 1930s, I think. But now I think we have new tools to understand how our ongoing investment and maintenance and vibrancy and livelihood around infrastructure. That is, how does the new mobility affect civic engagement, right? How does civic engagement affect community dialogue and health? How does it affect the ability for our older citizens to be taken care of, and on and on and on. But so flexibility and evolvability of the systems is now something we're thinking about, rather than large capital programs where we do big investments and we can't afford anything for a long time. We're now looking at all kinds of ways to build far more modular, upgradable, continuously adapting systems, and what that means in terms of our engineering.
We have some questions in the chat. So I'm going to read the first one. Good afternoon, Dr. Moser and Dr. Trigos. It is great to see you both in this interesting talk. I would like to ask you both a question. What are the transdisciplinary engineering projects or solutions that have impressed you the most, and why? That's the first question from the audience. You go ahead, Dr. Moser, and then I could.
One example is from transportation, from mobility. So, as you may know, in Japan, the population is aging very quickly. 2/3 of the population is already much older. And many of the small towns have been dying out. And so there's fewer people to take care of the older citizens. And the transportation networks, the bus systems or train systems, were becoming empty. And so the towns were losing so much money. So how do we fix this, right? Do we simply shut down the transportation? That doesn't seem quite right. Do we simply try to change the technology to resize? So I saw a project that had, first and foremost, several towns who had agreed to be part of this experiment and who were very involved in working through and defining what the real problem and feasible alternatives were. And so we developed it's called the Genki bus, but basically a van, a small van. But the key to this small transportation system is making it quite easy for elderly citizens who may not have a smartphone or access to the internet, different ways for them to be able to schedule and interact. So this was a wonderful engineering project that had very difficult scheduling issues, lots of technical choices, both about fuel and vehicle type, routing problems. So all kinds of really nice engineering problems. But here is one of the surprising transdisciplinary insights, because we brought sociologists to be part of this project as well. And so they paid attention deeply to the meaningfulness and the value of this new transportation mode for these citizens. And for many of the elderly citizens, they had not developed any new friendships in many years. And what we saw is that not were they increasing their ability to go to the hospital or to go to the town square, but they were now meeting other people, riding with them, and developing new friendships that were not possible. And so there was this emergent quality. And according to the participants, this was the most life-giving benefit that was completely, unanticipated in the original shaping of the problem. But I turn to that. That's the example that I have, that the solution would not have been possible if we had treated it as a classic origin destination transportation problem. That's my example.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say that I have worked with some operation research teams in Europe, and also a member of the Euro, which is like the continent operation research society there. And even though all of them went through the operation research curricula of mathematics, optimization, statistics, and so, they have evolved into this approach in the sense that, for example, every year they grant the PhD in OR for Europe. And in the last years, they claim something like, we don't want to make a rich company richer. We would like to improve the quality of life of as many people as possible. So they have developed projects on, for example, how to grant fishing license for several regions. And the objective is how to maximize the economic outreach of the population using these quantitative methods, but also talking to all the stakeholders involved. There is no unique definition of what transdisciplinarity approach is. Also, the International Society of Transdisciplinary Engineering says there are some elements, but we wouldn't like to have a definition because that would remove some of the ideas that are there.
I think we're getting closer, but I think some of the next questions that we've been asked might reveal that, because there are also failure modes when transdisciplinary does not work, or at least things that, when we're trying to be systems oriented and holistic, sometimes we can miss some things. Maybe I can comment on that, because one of the questions was, what's an example of when a transdisciplinary approach might fail?
Yes.
I think for me, being transdisciplinary is not being anti-disciplinary. It doesn't mean winging it or making things up just to be creative. The disciplinary insights are still a voice. It's just that now we have more voices, and we're learning how to integrate and make trades. So a failure, if the approach is, in Japanese, the wonderful word is tekito, which is, I think in English we might say hand waving, where people are trying really hard to be inclusive and to be holistic, but they don't actually allow the analysis of what is feasible or valuable. Because one of the things about science itself is that we must follow methods that allow us to overcome our bias, overcome our experience-based mental models, because many times both the risk and the opportunity are not visible to us. So I think the tricky part in transdisciplinarity is that it is not anti-disciplinarity, and we still have to do the math, right? We still have to see if the concrete's going to hold. We still have to see if the structure is going to go. And so I don't think that introducing transdisciplinary to an engineering curriculum means not teaching other things. I think it means adding some additional skill sets.
Yes, I have a way to explain transdisciplinarity in my research group and to the publics we have lecture, and probably you have heard it before. I like to see this like the world has many complex problems. And some of them, if a solution exists, or at least to make a better position on the current state, chances are that the object that's going to do it is going to come out of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as a device, as a software, as a cloud thing. But an app or something like that. Just imagine something like that. But that thing, let's call it the device, will only work if quantitative disciplines and qualitative disciplines were used to design it and build it. And all the stakeholders involved were involved in that. And when you build it and implement it, you have to make sure that it lasts as long as there's a better solution to that. So management knowledge should be involved. So within this explanation, there are plenty of things that we could do as universities in which we have both a qualitative and quantitative disciplines and measures regarding that. So making teams with management people, with engineers from different kinds, with educators, with people from social science, uh, great things could happen if we could talk to each other.
Well, as an intellectual exercise, it's we're engineering is often overconfident, and can be its weakness. I think we're trying to teach this next generation to love the problem rather than to love the solution, and that requires some humility. As you said, it's not about being anti-disciplinary. It is one of the we were watching the SpaceX launch last week, and when the vehicle exploded, everyone cheered because the failing is really learning. And one of the things about being in a transdisciplinary environment is that we are going to be surprised. And what we, I think, need to teach is there's joy in that. Thank goodness the world is more complex than just little old me. And there's a lot to learn, continue to learn, and problems to understand. And I think that is, at MIT, we have a long tradition of having a very egalitarian, low boundary or porous boundary, relatively small community. And one of the most remarkable things about our vibrancy at MIT is that it doesn't matter if you have a Nobel Prize or not. Every week every day you're going to bump into someone else and be surprised by an insight or an interesting new problem you hadn't thought about before. So I think that's the spirit of transdisciplinarity. So therefore we need to mentor and coach our students to have that curiosity, that humility, and that joy of loving the problem.
We have another question from the audience. Good afternoon. Do you agree with the expert opinions that in transdisciplinary engineering, the most important phase is the problem analysis and solutions design?
I think that that's right. I think that the most important is when we frame the problem and we are generating concepts that will allow us to design and iterate and develop. And hopefully we remember that later on when we're integrating and validating and supporting, that it is something about the synergy and the connectedness of that problem analysis, the problem framing, and the solution generation. It's the way that they are mapped, if you will. And we can learn that as engineers from many other professions, whether it's a great team in a kitchen at a wonderful restaurant, or a performance group in music that has to innovate and come up with certain things. That there's definitely a somehow a natural fit between the way the problem has been framed and the way the solution emerges. Those tend to be incredibly innovative, high-performing outcomes. So yeah, I would not say that one is more important than the other, but it's something about how they are connected to one another that is the secret sauce.
I would like also to add something that I learned recently from past experience. I would say that in the 80s and 90s, the way at least operation research operates is I have a problem, I'm going to develop a mathematical model. The really effort is how to solve the problem to optimality. So you have to know math, you have to know computers, structures, and things like that. And whenever I solve the optimal solution of that mathematical model, that's it. You have to implement it just a little bit, but just one iteration. Now I believe that through transdisciplinary and holding this systemic effort and all these voices, chances are that your solution is going to be a tool in which you input the current data of the problem. Chances are that the problem is infeasible. And then you have to make compromise among the stakeholders. Either you need more resources and then you give this and offer that and do a second run. And probably the second run is going to be infeasible again from different dimensions. And then this talk with the tool, we've developed some strong links among the participating people. We develop confidence and trust. And when you come to implement the solution, everybody had a voice.
Well, I think I like the word voice is the key here, and it's voice of others, but it's also voice of nature, and that these are now part of the conversation. You know, we teach in modeling, like some mathematical programming, there is clearly an objective function that's important, and deciding the objective function and selecting the constraints and choosing a method are a very critical part of actually defining the problem. But I think students today are learning not one technique, they're learning many techniques, and I hope they're learning that all models are wrong. You know, that's attributed to George Box, of course. All models are wrong, but some are useful. I talk about weather forecasting in hurricanes or typhoon forecasting, and in the fact that these days, you know, we might get 19 different models that we're using as voices to understand the situation and nature. And I think the next generation of engineers, especially the digital generation, are going to be far more comfortable than our generation at having data lakes and model lakes and all other kinds of bodies of water in their life.
There's a question here in the list that say, well, please tell us how MIT Engineering School is promoting transdisciplinary formation of its students. And then I will talk a little bit about Tec de Monterrey.
Sure, thank you. So within the engineering school, over the arc of the last 20 or 30 years, you know, we've seen a continuous increase in project-based and team-based learning. We still have the same basic requirements for calculus and physics and chemistry. That's put a lot more pressure, I think, on the time our students have. But we're lucky that we get amazing students, and many of them enter now MIT with already strong mathematic, physics, and chemistry skills. The other trend is leadership, and by that I mean not being powerful, but I'm really referring to distributed leadership and service. And so I think in what famous a book, if you don't know it, called The Hidden Curriculum by Benson Snyder, which was about MIT. the lessons that MIT students and MIT engineers learn outside the classroom in terms of how to be engaged in these conversations with other students, but also how to form teams, how to frame problems, how continues to be essential to the MIT experience. And we have a lot of respect for that at MIT and how we develop the next generation. So if you were to ask the Dean of Engineering rather than me, I'm sure that the Dean would say we continue to think about how to increase the readiness of our engineering graduates to be effective as part of multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary teams, how to be ready personally for innovation, and themselves how to lead.
Thank you. Regarding Tech de Monterrey, I would say that Tech has started this work so many years ago, all the way from the 70s when we started. I don't know if it's the first or one of the first industrial and systems engineering curricula in Latin America. And we have evolved through the systemic approach. And as I said before, in my eyes, transdisciplinarity is an evolution of that systems engineering approach. And several professors here at Tec de Monterrey are working on transdisciplinary issues. Some of us belong to the International Society of Transdisciplinary Engineering. Some of us publish through the journals of that and present year after year through the conference. Actually, there's a conference every year that is held in the summer. In the second week of July, this year is going to be in Thailand. So if you go to TE 2023 in Google, you could look it up. And there are several venues on that you will be amazed of what is done through transdisciplinary. Here at the School of Business, through the research groups, we have a research group focused on transdisciplinary approach of value creation and global opportunities, in which several of us professors are dedicating our research and how to create value using this approach. So there's a lot to say about that. We have some other questions. Excellent talk, thank you. I was just wondering how a transdisciplinary approach may uncover greenwashing in many environments initiatives. I thinking about some retailers, omni-channel solutions, food for thought.
There's something behind the question, but let me take a shot at it. I think it comes back to this notion that simply having holistic intent is not enough. That again, nature is a voice and should be part of the conversation. And what that means is that no matter our good intentions, if the solutions we introduce into a community aren't actually having the effect we hope they will have, then we should be thinking of other ways. And equally with regard to greenwashing, that we thinking about sustainability and especially roadmaps, for example, in this journey towards a carbon neutral or carbon free energy system, there's a lot of economic and political and legacy barriers that must be addressed, and part of a really effective transdisciplinary approach is to avoid kind of just yes or no debates, but really expose a broad set of alternatives and approaches that are going to move us forward together, and that includes when a supposed alternative is raised that is only perhaps effective skin deep, that we have the ability in a multidisciplinary way, including the voice of non-experts and the voice of nature, that we are very good at developing and communicating those alternatives.
Thank you. We have another question. It says, what do you think it is the main challenge when working on a transdisciplinary project in your experience?
Um, speaking a different language, and I don't mean Spanish and English. I mean, but we especially we humans we want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to be part of our tribe, and it's threatening to be working on something you may be professionally trained for and have identity and expertise in, and someone from a completely different field or a completely different perspective comes in and shows that there's a weakness or to what you're suggesting. So the real challenge is how to create a problem-solving um, context, a problem-solving environment, so that we can have these transdisciplinary conversations that are effective. And again, I think it comes back to the very thing that can make a profession strong may in the end lead it to be arrogant and inflexible. And we have to, as around the world, we're all becoming, I think, less, maybe more strident and less flexible in the last decade or two. And so I think we need to work really hard, even within engineering, to make sure that we're far more facile, accepting, and open-minded.
And in that regard, perhaps we have a lot to learn from international business and strategy, in which if you would like to make business in a different country, probably with a different religion, with a different point of view, then you have to learn the other side before attempting to do the business. You have to understand what the culture is. So each discipline have their style, have their culture, their secret handshake, if you will. So in order to really work together, we have to understand that and to be open. And I believe that Tec de Monterrey is a great place, as well as many others like MIT, in which we promote the different measures to work on projects, to have different measures in the same class, do the final project together, and have those point of views, which I believe this is something that you don't see in every school in the world.
Let me say perhaps a final thing that there's hope. It sounds like we're talking only about 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds. If you're older, there's still hope. So the program I direct at MIT, System Design and Management, the average age of our students is 32. We are both in the engineering school and the business school. All of our incoming students have some background in technology or science. We have sometimes an MD. But I invite you to visit, to take some of our classes, to apply for the program. The average age is 32, but I've had 60-year-olds in the program. And today's conversation is precisely what we do over a year or two. And it is fun. I tell you, it's just exciting and it's engaging. The students are from all over the world, 26 different countries, from many different fields, and they're focused on energy transition and health and future mobility and agriculture and space. So many interesting topics. So please reach out and join us.
In this point, I will ask the audience to join us through the media. Let's say LinkedIn, both for Dr. Bryan Moser, his program, LinkedIn for me, Federico Trigos, and our group, and Tec de Monterrey, in which periodically we have activities, we have lectures in this topic, and we are trying to form a community, not only national, but international, through all these partners. So the media like LinkedIn is great to do that. So I mentioned that the conference is going to be in July, the second week of July, I believe. And here at Tec de Monterrey, May 11 and 12, we have the Transdisciplinary Research Group Colloquy, or Colloquio in Spanish, and we will show 13 papers plus a keynote address from Dr. Pisut Kupsap, who is the president of the conference this year. So please contact us for these activities. We broadcast that through the media like LinkedIn periodically. So there are plenty of things that we could do together. It is.
I look forward to the international conference being in Monterrey in the near future.
Oh,
I want to ask you to volunteer to be the host, please.
Thank you. So it's 5:57 here in Central Mexico time. Greta, I don't know. I have plenty of questions. So probably if we have the sources or the emails, you could forward it to us, and probably we could try to answer to mail or through LinkedIn or something like that. Do you have some final words, Greta, for us?
Thank you so much, Dr. Moser and Dr. Trigos, for sharing with us your time and all your experience. And we are really glad to have you here in this edition. And thank you, everyone, for participating. We hope to see you in our next edition, Scientific Coffee Tech de Monterrey.